In a remote base lost in the middle of the desert, Captain Madison Cole passed for a simple mechanic, invisible among the soldiers she served. No one suspected what her faded U.S. Air Force insignia really meant. But when the enemy surrounded the camp and all seemed lost, she said 6 words that changed everything. "I can fly the Hawk." Do you want to know what happened next? Before we continue, tell us which country you're watching this video from. Subscribe and leave a like so this true story can inspire as many people as possible. Night had fallen over Camp Resolute like a sheet of steel. A dry wind swept through the tents, lifting clouds of dust so fine they seeped into every breath. On the horizon, the mountains were jagged shadows, and the moonless sky swallowed everything. The only sounds were the distant hum of generators and, at times, the sharp crack of a radio antenna swaying in the wind. The entire camp smelled of diesel, dried blood, and heated metal. That night, fear had a tangible scent. In the command room, the lamps flickered, powered by a tired line. A map of the sector lay spread across the central table, covered in red and blue marks that tangled like scars. Captain Grant Miller, a veteran of 15 years, leaned over it, fingers gripping the edges. His weathered face, burned by sand and battle, stayed impassive, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. Around him, his men spoke in low voices, checked their weapons, pretended not to see the wounded lined up against the wall. Transmissions had been jammed for over an hour. The Bravo squad had lost half its men returning from a recovery mission south of the valley. The enemy, invisible in the night, was closing the trap. Without air support, they wouldn't last until dawn. Captain Miller glanced at the main radio, silent, and then at the window opening onto the void. It was as if the world were holding its breath. "Are there any fighter pilots here?" His voice cut through the air like a desperate order. No movement. An operator briefly lifted his head, then went back to work. This wasn't an airbase. Here, they repaired, they healed, they survived. No mirages, no F-16s, only dust and despair. In the darkest corner of the room, a chair creaked. Conversation stopped. A figure slowly stood up, a slender silhouette in overalls stained with oil and sand. Her hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, her face marked by fatigue, but her eyes shone with calm clarity. Madison Cole, captain in the U.S. Air Force, though here reduced to a maintenance technician's role. Most had even forgotten she held a rank. She spoke simply, without raising her voice. "I can fly." The silence that followed wasn't one of respect but of disbelief. In this room full of broad-shouldered, calloused men, the words hung fragile in the air before colliding with suspicion. A sergeant named Regan shook his head. "With what? A wrench and duct tape?" Madison didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on Miller. The captain slowly lifted his head. "What have you flown before?" he asked, his tone almost ironic. "A 10 Thunderbolt II." The name dropped like an anvil. The laughter died instantly. Everyone knew what that meant. The Hawk, the flying tank, the beast that lived close to the ground to protect those fighting below. A machine built for dirty war, the kind fought face to face. Miller stared at her for a long moment. Behind him, Derek Chow, still covered in dust and blood, whispered, "We haven't seen a Hawk here in 3 years." "There's one," she replied. "Parked behind the south hangar. It was declared out of service. But I can get it flying again." Heads turned. A young operator muttered, "That's suicide." Another added, "Even if she starts it up, no one takes off in that old beast without full support." The doubts piled up, heavy as the sand on the tents. Miller stepped closer, his boots striking the concrete. "Captain Cole, do you understand what you're saying? If you're wrong, we all burn before sunrise." "I know. But if we stay here waiting, it's the same." She didn't flinch. Her voice carried neither pride nor defiance, only a calm, unsettling certainty. In a corner, Senior Chief Dalton crossed his arms. "Captain," he said to the commander, "we know nothing about her. Maybe she flew 10 years ago. Maybe she's never taken off under fire." Miller didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed locked on Madison's. What he saw there wasn't fear or arrogance, just raw determination. A silence heavier than dust settled over the room. The only sounds were the slow breathing and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Then Miller finally said, "All right. Show me." Madison nodded. She picked up her jacket and adjusted it. Her movements were precise, mechanical, those of a woman with nothing to prove but everything to do. As she passed the others, she felt their eyes on her, suspicious, mocking, but also intrigued. None of them spoke, but even those who judged her understood she might just have given them a chance. They stepped out into the night. The desert air slapped their faces, hot, dry, and full of sand. The sky was streaked with bright trails, the enemy's flares. In the distance, short bursts of gunfire echoed, muffled, like thunder trapped in the throat of the world. The light from the searchlights trembled on the runway. The plane was there, massive, motionless, a silhouette of steel with worn edges. The paint was peeling, but on the fuselage, you could still make out the shark's mouth painted beneath the cockpit. She laid a hand on the metal. It was cold. "I've been maintaining it for months," she said. "I know every bolt. It's just been waiting for someone to bring it back to life." Behind her, Miller looked from the aircraft to his men. "If she manages to get it airborne," he murmured, "we might have a chance." Dalton slowly shook his head. "Or it'll be our last illusion." Madison didn't respond. The wind lifted strands of her hair, heavy with dust. She took a deep breath, as if breathing again after months underwater. The Hog was waiting for her. Dawn hadn't yet broken over Camp Resolute, but the dust still held the heat of a sleepless night. In the technical bay, Madison Cole tightened the straps on her vest while listening to the muffled sounds of the camp. Someone was fixing a generator. Another laughed nervously near the showers. Nothing seemed different, and yet everything had changed. For the first time in months, people looked at her differently, not as a cog in the machine, but as a possibility. Before this night, she had belonged to the camp's shadows. She arrived before everyone else, left after everyone else. They called her Mech or F, the maintenance girl, never by her rank. Her days were spent inspecting turbines, cleaning filters, checking circuits. She answered without complaint, kept her tone neutral, avoided conversations. She knew that here, in this man's world built for war, silence was worth more than a useless defense. Still, rumors spread. Some said she had failed in aerial combat. Others that she'd been sent here after a classified incident. A lieutenant had even bet she'd never left the ground. Madison let them talk. Their words slid off her like sand off the Hog's fuselage. Every evening, when the sun sank behind the dunes, she stayed alone in the hangar under the pale light of a work lamp. She worked on the A-10 parked there, the one everyone said was scrap metal. She tightened bolts, replaced cables, wiped the dust from the cockpit like someone caressing a scar. Men would pass by without a word, sometimes an amused glance, sometimes a mocking whistle. But she understood the silence of metal, the mute promise that a machine keeps for the one who knows how to listen. She remembered the day she arrived at Resolute, trucks and convoy, heat warping the air above the tarmac, the supply sergeant greeting her with a shrug. "Maintenance, over there. Building C." No handshake, no welcome, just an order thrown into the wind. She nodded without a word. At first, she tried to fit in. Once, she offered to help a demoning team. The section chief had laughed. "No thanks, Captain, we've got enough daredevils already." Since that day, she'd been content to observe. The SEALs lived in their own closed circle, night missions, barracks jokes, rituals of belonging. She was part of it without ever truly belonging. But that distance wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Years had taught her that the time would come when the world would need the ones it had dismissed. So she waited, patient, hidden among the smells of grease and kerosene, like a weapon left too long in its holster. The day before, when she had said those words, "I can fly," something had cracked in the air. She had felt it. Not just disbelief, but a fracture in routine. For a single second, all those men had stopped being sure of themselves. And in that doubt, she had found her place again. She closed the toolbox and sat on the metal bench. The sound of the wind seeped through the tent walls, lifting dust around her boots. In her pocket she held a small folded photo, a squadron, 7 people in flight suits, forced smiles, a desert behind them. On the back, a handwritten note, Raven Flight 2018. All gone, except her. A voice pulled her from her thoughts. Captain, that was hot. His features were hollowed, his eyes still red from lack of sleep. He hesitated, something rare in him. I mean, we judged you too quickly last night. She looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. You had your reasons, Lieutenant. Yeah, but we lost too many people to still believe in miracles. And yet when I saw that hog roar, I knew maybe we were wrong. Silence. She slid the photo back into her pocket. It's not a miracle, sir. It's just an engine running, a gun firing straight, and someone who refuses to give up. The soldier nodded, a tired smile at the corner of his mouth. Miller's waiting for you in command. They prepared an evacuation plan. She stood, adjusted her jacket. I'm coming. Outside, the gray light of dawn began to filter in. The camp was coming back to life, a supply truck shout, a cart passing, the acrid smell of warmed coffee. But the air felt different, less heavy, almost nervous. People talked about her, turned as she passed. Some saluted her, others averted their eyes, unable to admit they had doubted. On the tarmac, the hog still rested. Its carcass bore the marks of time, but its turbines had found their breath again. Madison placed her hand on the canopy, the metal warm under her palm. She murmured, "We're not invisible anymore, you and I, not this time." Then she turned toward the command post, ready to face what came next. The command post buzzed with nervous activity. Maps were spread on the floor. Radios sat on ammunition crates and voices braided together in a barely contained tension. Miller spoke in a low voice with Dalton while Chow checked coordinates on a dusty screen. When Madison entered, the conversation stopped. Eyes turned toward her, not hostile this time, but curious and cautious. "Captain Cole," Miller said, looking up. "We're preparing the extraction plan. The enemy has repositioned north of the valley. If we don't clear the route before noon, they'll cut our line of retreat." She moved closer to the table. The red markers thickened around the perimeter. "You want me to cover the exit?" "Exactly. But before that, I want to know how much we can count on this aircraft." Madison nodded. "If the hog holds for takeoff, I can make it do everything it did before. It won't fly fast, but it won't let me down." Dalton grunted, arms crossed. "That still worries me." She held his gaze without wavering. "What worries everyone, Chief, is what we do despite them." A silence settled. Then Miller raised his hand to cut it short. "We don't have the luxury of doubt. We talk after." She felt the attention relax just a bit. Yet the weight of the past returned in her gut. The smell of kerosene, the drone of turbines, these brought back images she had buried. Elman 2019. The heat clung to the skin like a layer of fire. The sky was white, crushed by light. In her helmet the control voice screamed, "Raven, we've lost the line, we have wounded on the ground." She had dove without thinking, the hog vibrating like an enraged beast. Below, tiny silhouettes ran between explosions. An Allied convoy caught in an ambush. She locked onto the target, aligned her trajectory. The roar of the GAU-8 covered everything. A second of hell. Then the silence broken by cries over the radio. "Target neutralized. You saved them." That day she had also lost something. Her wingman, Lieutenant Kane, struck by enemy fire. The explosion had lit the sky like a sick sun. She still remembered the scream in her helmet that cut off. Miller tapped the map with his finger, bringing them back to the present. "If we want to open an evacuation corridor, we have to neutralize their positions here and there. You know the topography a bit. I'll do a reconnaissance pass before the assault." "Perfect. We'll cover you by radio." She noted the precision and calm in the way he spoke to her now. He said "you" to her. A small but meaningful nuance. In an army where every word mattered, it was silent recognition. Chow stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "I've prepared the flight map. You'll have to fly low to the ground. No more than 100 feet altitude, minimum radar," Chow said. "As usual," she replied. He gave a brief smile. "You almost make me regret not knowing how to fly." "No, you wouldn't want to be up there. You don't breathe any better, you just fall from higher up." A few soldiers' quiet laughter lightened the air, but in Dalton's eyes, suspicion still lingered. He stepped closer as the room slowly emptied. "I don't care about your past," he said bluntly. But if you make a mistake, even a small one, it's us who'll pay the price. I know. No, you don't. These men are counting on you. This isn't a simulator. She stared at him for a long time. You think I've never seen a cockpit filled with smoke? You think I don't know what it's like to have lives hanging on your decision? Her voice came out hard, sharper than she meant. Dalton lowered his eyes for a moment. Then prove it, he murmured. She stayed alone for a few seconds after he left. The ticking of the clock became audible again. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, Kane's face appeared, motionless, frozen in the white light of the explosion. Not this time, she thought. When she stepped outside, the morning wind swept across the runway. The first rays of the sun outlined the silhouette of the hawk, still, patient. She stopped for a moment, watching her footprints in the dust like an invisible starting line. This time, she wasn't just a mechanic. This time, it was her turn to hold the line. The sun was climbing slowly above the desert, flooding the base with harsh light. The air shimmered, rippling above the tarmac, every surface burning. Camp Resolute had turned into a hive, figures running, orders shouted, radios crackling. That tense electricity of the hours before battle filled the air, a waiting laced with adrenaline and dread. In the south hangar, Madison was pulling on her flight suit. The stiff, dust-stained fabric still smelled of kerosene and metal. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from impatience. She zipped up, slid her ID tag into her chest pocket. On the collar, her name was barely readable. Behind her, heavy footsteps echoed. She turned, it was Miller. He entered without knocking, his expression hard, his gaze focused. We've got confirmation. Recon drones spotted an enemy armored convoy approaching. They'll reach us in less than 2 hours. If you take off in time, you can intercept them before they reach the valley. Understood? Understood, she answered simply. I've ordered the tech unit to help you prep. You'll have 2 men with you. 2 technicians entered immediately. They gave a small nod, visibly nervous. For them, she was almost a myth, a woman about to fly a forgotten hawk. One murmured, we checked the tank. There's JP8 fuel left, but the filters are old. It'll hold, Madison cut in. We'll change them when we're back. Miller looked at her for a moment without speaking. It was as if he was searching her face for something, hesitation, doubt. He found nothing. You have my go, he finally said. 2 seconds of silence. Then, lower, didn't think I'd ever say this, but, good hunting, Captain. She gave a barely visible smile. Thank you, sir. When he left the hangar, the tension he'd carried with him dissipated like mist. Madison took a deep breath. She felt strangely calm, as if the world had narrowed to a series of precise, familiar, reassuring actions. The technicians checked the turbines. One of them, young, looked up. You ever flown something this old before? Older, she said without looking up, and it always brought me back. She climbed the metal ladder, helmet under her arm. The cockpit welcomed her like a refuge, the instruments dead, the canopy dulled by sand, everything marked by time. Yet none of it intimidated her. Her hands instinctively found every lever, every dial. This hog was like an old scar, rough but alive. A memory brushed her mind, her first solo flight, years ago in the Nevada sky. Her instructor's words echoed, a good pilot doesn't think about fear. He thinks about trajectory. She had never forgotten that line. She was thinking about it now, in silence. Radio crackled. Grisha to Raven, Miller speaking. Pre-flight check in progress. Main systems operational, ammunition verified. We'll send coordinates after takeoff. Copy. She lowered her visor and closed the canopy with a sharp motion. The noise cut off instantly. Only the sound of her own breathing echoed inside her helmet. She tested the controls, started the ignition sequence. The turbines whined, coughed up a cloud of dust. Then the roar rose, deep, guttural. The ground trembled beneath the hangar. Outside, soldiers had stopped to watch. The hog shook on its wheels, but it was alive. Madison touched the dashboard with her fingertips. Here we go again, old friend. She signaled the technician to clear away, then engaged the taxi. The tires screeched on the cracked concrete. Ahead of her, the runway stretched endlessly, shimmering under the heat. Through the radio, Miller spoke again. Sky's yours, Raven. Affirmative. She pushed the throttle forward. The hog roared, tearing itself slowly from the ground. Dust billowed into a golden cloud. Soldiers raised their hands to shield their eyes. For a few seconds, it felt as if the whole camp held its breath. Then the sound receded, leaving behind a vibrating silence. Inside the cockpit, Madison felt the thrust pinning her to the seat. The landscape flattened beneath her. The runway became a line, then a dot. She was no longer the invisible woman from the hangar. She was Raven again. The air grew clearer, the radio sharper. Resolute to Raven, status? Altitude stable, heading northwest. Entering recon zone. Copy. Keep your channel open. She lifted her eyes toward the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, dotted with dunes and dark scars where the wind had bitten the earth. Somewhere out there, the enemy was moving. Madison adjusted, tightened her harness straps, and murmured to herself, "Here we go." The hog vibrated like a waking beast. The gauges slowly stabilized. The warning light shifted from red to amber, then to green. Madison fine-tuned the controls, feeling the familiar resistance of the stick under her fingers. Through the canopy, the desert unfolded like an endless sea, broken by pale ridges and dry riverbeds. She climbed slightly, barely 200 feet, then leveled out. In her helmet, the radio crackled again. "Grisha to Raven, this is Resolute. Confirm fuel status. 80%, normal consumption. Continuing toward the northern valley. Copy. Ground team holding position." A faint smile touched her lips. The tone on the radio had changed, less doubt, more respect. Trust was returning, fragile but real. The hog pressed on, heavy, solid, each vibration echoing through her chest. The engine's rumble wasn't noise, it was rhythm, music. She had found her tempo again, the one no base or rank could ever take from her. Below, the first traces of the valley appeared, a collapsed tent, the carcass of an abandoned vehicle, scars left by old strikes. She activated the infrared camera. Red dots lit up on the screen, scattered heat signatures in motion. Raven to Resolute. Movement confirmed in the northern corridor. Around 20 contacts, maybe more. Advancing in small groups. Copy, Raven. Other reports indicate a heavy convoy coming from the south. If you can delay their junction, we might have a chance. Copy. She cut the transmission. The silence of the sky felt almost too vast. The steady breath of the turbines filled everything. She let her gaze drift toward the horizon. The mountains in the distance seemed motionless, but she knew that behind those ridges lay death, organized, methodical. Her thoughts wandered back to the base, the tired faces of soldiers, the sound of boots on gravel, the weary looks that had turned into hope. She remembered Chow standing near the medical tent, his face coated with dust. He had said, "Maybe we were wrong." Yes, they had been wrong, but she didn't hold it against them. You don't forgive the world for being blind, you learn to see farther than it does. She looked down at the dashboard. The needles trembled slightly. A warning light blinked, hydraulic system B, unstable. Of course, she muttered. She adjusted the pressure, rerouted a secondary line. The hog groaned, then steadied itself. Nothing serious, yet. In her mind, fragments of her training began to resurface. The instructor's orders, the low-altitude drills, the warnings about the GAU-8's roar. When it growls, it's already too late for the enemy. Those words had stayed with her. Today, they echoed like a promise. A voice returned in her ear. "Miller. Raven, this is Miller. We've marked your return corridor. Once you complete the first run, we'll guide you toward Point Bravo. Copy?" And Raven, she waited. "Be careful up there." Just a breath through the headset, but she felt the strange warmth of those words. She answered almost in a whisper, "Always, Captain." She checked the remaining distance, 20 kilometers. The sun was climbing high, casting a harsh light that erased all shadows. The hog skimmed low now, its outline melting into the dust. A faint alarm sounded. "Radar detection. Enemy contact detected," announced the automated voice. She stayed calm. Once, twice, the signal returned, then vanished. They knew she was coming. She armed the main system. A heavy click answered, the GAU-8 cannon ready to spit fire. The cartridges vibrated in the drum, aligned like promises of thunder. She drew a deep breath. The valley appeared below her, a ribbon of sand dotted with dark shapes, vehicles, camouflaged positions. The coordinates matched. She eased the stick forward. The hog tilted, beginning its turn. Resolute, this is Raven. Visual on target. Beginning approach. Copy. Good hunting. She engaged targeting, locked onto the first point. The screen lit up with a red square. Her calm voice filled the cockpit. Weapons free. A moment of absolute silence, then the roar of the cannon. A rain of fire cut through the sky. The impacts traced a straight line in the sand, lifting an enormous cloud. Over the radio, shouts mixed with static, but she no longer listened. Her whole being was reduced to that sound, that vibration, that certainty of being exactly where she was meant to be. The cannon's roar faded, leaving behind a silence thick with dust. Below, the valley burned. Vehicles erupted in flames, sending up thick columns of black smoke that rose into the sky like skeletal fingers. Madison climbed slightly, stabilized her course. Adrenaline pulsed in her temples. The hog still trembled, alive, panting like a sated beast. Raven to Resolute. First strike successful. Target destroyed, 60% effectiveness. Going for a second run. Copy, Raven. Ground teams confirm. Looks like you hurt them. They'll regroup. I still have fuel. Going back in. She banked the aircraft and dove again. The wind howled against the canopy. The ground rushed up at a dizzying speed. The radar alarm shrieked, sharper this time. She locked onto a second position, adjusted the heads-up sight. Fire. Another burst from the GAU-8 tore open the enemy line. With each shot, the hog kicked back slightly under the recoil, as if it were roaring in rage. Over the radio, muffled exclamations were heard. From their post a few kilometers away, the scouts watched the scene. Miller exhaled, almost to himself, "Goddamn, she's really doing it." Cha replied, "That's Raven, Captain. We'd better get used to it." At that same moment, in the cockpit, Madison was already locking onto a third group. Her gaze swept over the thermal screen. The red dots vanished one by one. The enemy was firing back now, streaks of light rising from the ground, shoulder-launched missiles, probably. One of them passed just a few meters from her left wing. The alarm screamed, "Missile inbound." She banked hard, cut the throttle, dropped the plane into a controlled dive. The hog shook, turbines whining. She released flares, small bursts of fire spiraling behind her. The missile exploded in a cloud of sparks. Raven, this is Resolute. Status? Unarmed. Minor damage to left wing. Maintaining course. Her breathing quickened for an instant, then steadied. She knew this kind of fear, the kind that bites, then fades. The useful kind. The one that keeps you sharp. She made another pass, higher this time, observing the chaos she'd left behind. Silhouettes scattered in all directions. The enemy advance was broken. The convoy, severed. She felt a tightening in her chest, a cold satisfaction, mixed with sorrow. You never win without leaving something behind. A soft beep sounded. Communication. Raven, this is Miller. We have a new situation. 2 teams pinned down on Delta Road. They're under heavy fire. You're the only one who can clear them a path. Send the coordinates. Latitude 27 north, longitude 45 east. Partially destroyed urban area. Copy. I'm on my way. She changed heading, increased thrust. The horizon shifted. The dunes gave way to a flat plain scattered with ruins. The gutted walls of old villages cast long shadows. Flashes already crossed the ground, crossfire. She approached at low altitude, reducing speed. On the thermal screen, 2 blue dots pulsed, the Allied positions. All around them, dozens of red ones. They were surrounded. Resolute, this is Raven. I have visual. Too close for a direct strike. I'll sweep the perimeter. Do what you can, they're exposed. She descended so low that she could see the dust rising under the hog's wake. Ground fire intensified, striking the fuselage. A bullet tore through the side panel, whistling past her shoulder. She didn't move. The sight locked onto the enemy line. Fire! The GAU-8 roared for the third time. The street became hell. Enemy positions were torn apart. Walls collapsed under the onslaught. In her headset, shouts mixed with static, then the voice of Shaw, "Target neutralized, path clear, we're moving." Madison climbed immediately, gaining altitude again. Raven to Resolute. Objective complete. The teams are free. A long silence, then Miller's voice, unsteady with emotion, "Copy, Raven. You just saved their lives." She didn't have time to answer. A dull thud shook the aircraft. A shrill alarm blared, "Hydraulic failure." The hog lurched sharply. Madison pulled the stick, but the controls barely responded. She clenched her jaw, compensating with the right engine, stabilizing the trajectory. A smell of burning filled the cockpit. "Raven, status?" "Hydraulic system damaged. Partial control. I'm still airborne." "Return immediately, Raven." "Negative, not yet. There are still vehicles east of the valley. I can stop them." Her voice was steady, without a tremor. She knew this kind of decision only came once in a lifetime. She pushed the throttle, forcing the wounded plane to climb again. Ahead, the desert light thickened, almost white. Enemy shapes emerged once more. The hog advanced, damaged but stubborn, and Madison smiled, a small, almost invisible smile. "One more run, old friend." Just one. The heat in the cockpit was suffocating. The right engine's hum throbbed like a distorted heartbeat. The battered hog struggled to hold its course, every turn echoing through the frame like a groan. Madison clenched her teeth, eyes fixed on the gun sight. The alarms kept beeping in steady rhythm, a brutal reminder the machine might not survive another pass. "Raven to Resolute," she said, voice tight but composed. "I still have vehicles in motion, 2 armored trucks heading southeast. If I let them through, they'll rejoin the main column. Raven, you're out of margin. We're recalling you to base." "Not yet, Captain. Give me 30 seconds. A silence on the radio. Then Miller's voice, lower, rougher. "Do your job, Raven. We've got you covered." She pushed the stick forward. The hog's nose dropped, diving toward the valley. Wind screamed against the canopy. Columns of smoke rose all around her, darkening the sky, blurring the horizon. Radar alarms wailed again. This time, she didn't even try to silence them. The trucks appeared through the haze, dark silhouettes speeding over the sand. She corrected her line, compensating drift with the left engine. The main cannon thrummed under her fingers. "Fire!" The sound tore through her whole body. A short, precise burst, the first vehicle exploded, a bloom of orange fire. The second tried to flee, but the next burst split it in two. In her headset, voices shouted, "Impact confirmed. Target destroyed." Madison pulled the stick back. The hog climbed with difficulty, its left wing dragging. A red warning light flashed on the dashboard, "Hydraulics, critical. Overheat. Right engine." She inhaled slowly, searching for balance. "Resolute, I've taken heavy damage. Returning to base. We have you on radar. Altitude 200 feet, heading due south. Hang in there, Raven." The hog shuddered. The stick vibrated like a muscle at its limit. She held it with one hand, the other tapping the console to check engine temperature. Each gauge seemed to climb before her eyes. Below, the earth opened in places, streaked with still smoking craters. She recognized the zones she had struck, the black lines where war left its signature. A strange calm settled over her. It was no longer fear or rage, only pure focus. The outside world faded away. The radio crackled again. "Raven, this is Shaw. We can see you from the ground. Fine work, ma'am. We owe you our skins." She smiled faintly. "Then make sure you do something worthwhile with them." A violent jolt cut the moment short. The right wing began to shake hard, one of the flaps had given way. The aircraft rolled sharply, plunging into a dangerous dive. Madison pulled the stick with all her strength. The hog leveled out at the last second, only a few dozen meters above the ground. Her breath caught. Sweat ran down her neck. "Not now, girl, not now." The right engine spat a long flame, then its rumble turned uneven. The pressure needle was dropping. Every second counted now. She switched to the auxiliary circuit, diverting part of the power to the left side. The Hawk slowed but held flight. Resolute to Raven, you're 5 minutes from base. We have visual, rescue crews are ready. Copy. Beneath her, the desert stretched out still and almost peaceful. The contrast between that calm and the storm she'd left behind struck her. She thought briefly of all those months walking between the tents, invisible, erased, of all the times she'd stayed silent not to disturb, of all the glances that had slid over her. Now they would look differently, not out of vengeance, not for pride, but because she had just reminded them all that worth isn't declared. It's proven. A bitter smell of smoke crept into the cockpit. The temperature gauge flashed red. She clenched her teeth. Raven to base, I'm losing the right engine. Forced approach. Copy, Raven. Runway is clear. You've got a tailwind. Perfect. She lowered the landing gear manually. The lever resisted, then gave with a hard snap. 3 green lights lit up. The turbines howled, the Hawk shuddered, every bolt groaning under strain. The outline of the camp finally appeared on the horizon. She could make out the tents, the vehicles, the figures clustered near the runway. In her headset, Miller's voice resonated. You're almost there, Raven. Hold your line, you've done it. She didn't answer. She focused on the glide, on the descent. The Hog approached, heavy, wounded, but still alive. One last thought crossed her mind. Kane, if you can see me, this time, we're coming home. The sky darkened as she drew near. The sun, veiled by dust, cast an ochre light across the strip. The Hog sank slowly, swaying like a wounded bird. The alarms persisted, stubborn and rhythmic, like a desperate heartbeat. Madison kept her eyes fixed on the white line of the runway, hands locked on the stick. Resolute to Raven, you're on axis, altitude steady. Copy. A shudder. The right wing trembled harder. The left engine whined, overheating. The temperature needle climbed into the red. Madison drew a deep breath. Sweat blurred her vision, but her mind was crystal clear. No room for panic. Not now. She reduced the throttle again, corrected drift with the remaining ailerons. The Hog steadied a few meters above the ground. She saw the tarmac rushing up, every crack, every oil stain gleaming in the light. You're almost there, Raven, shouted the radio. She didn't answer. The impact came sharp and sudden. The wheels hit the runway, bounced, then gripped. The Hog roared. The brakes screamed. A trail of smoke stretched behind it. The left engine sputtered, then died completely. Silence fell. The plane slid a few more meters, then stopped in the middle of the tarmac. A cloud of dust enveloped it. Madison stayed still, fingers locked around the stick, breath shallow. She could only hear the slow ticking of cooling metal. Raven, this is Miller, respond. At last she lifted her hand to the radio beside her. In one piece, she said, and a disbelieving laugh broke through the static. Then came applause, shouts, the whole camp seemed to release hours of tension in a single breath. The desert wind struck her full on. The silence of the base mingled with the distant echo of engines and the hurried footsteps she heard approaching. Figures were already running toward her, technicians, soldiers, Shaw at their head, his rifle still slung over his shoulder. Madison unbuckled the harnesses, removed her helmet. Her face was covered in soot, her lips cracked from the heat. She climbed slowly down the ladder, her legs heavy, every movement measured. When she set foot on the ground, she finally felt the weight of everything she had just done fall upon her shoulders. Shaw reached her first. Good God, Captain. What held that thing together? Pure willpower? She gave a tired smile. That's usually what holds best. Miller approached next, slower, graver. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, then raised his hand in salute. Mission accomplished, Raven, and beyond. She returned the salute, standing straight despite the fatigue. Their eyes met, an unspoken exchange full of recognition. Around them, the men were gathering, staring at the plane like a miraculous relic. The turbines were still smoking. The chipped paint revealed the raw metal beneath, scarred by battle, but whole, like her. Dalton arrived last. He stayed at a distance for a few seconds, then walked forward, hands on his hips. I told you I don't like ifs. Now I think I might have to learn to live with them. A fleeting smile crossed Madison's face. Then she looked up at the Hawk. He kept his word. Who? Asked Shaw. Him, she answered simply. The Hog. He never lets down those who still believe. The evening wind began to rise, lifting the dust around them. The camp slowly returned to calm. Technicians were already bustling around the aircraft, others were gathering debris. The smell of smoke mixed with that of hot sand. Miller placed a hand on her shoulder. "Get some rest, Raven. We'll debrief tomorrow." "It's not over, Captain. The enemy's pulling back, but they'll come again." "Yes. And when they do, we'll know who to trust with the sky." She nodded slowly, then walked away across the runway, helmet under her arm. Her boots kicked up golden dust in the twilight. The men watched her go, some in silence, others still murmuring her call sign like a promise. When she reached the hangar, she stopped and turned back toward the runway. The Hog rested there, blackened, battered, but majestic, a living memory of what she had been, and of what she was finally becoming again. She exhaled softly, almost a whisper. "We've won the night." The next morning, when Resolute awoke to an unusual calm, the wind had died, leaving in the air the scent of heated sand and burnt metal. The first light of day revealed the scars of battle, melted tires, scattered shells, dust clinging to faces. Yet, for the first time in weeks, the camp no longer trembled under threat. Madison had been up before dawn. She had barely slept. Her body felt heavy, her arms like lead, but her mind remained clear. She had washed quickly, without a mirror, then put on a khaki t-shirt and oil-stained pants. No ceremony, no speech, it was simply time to set things right again. The Hog, now silent, still sat on the runway. Around it, a team of mechanics worked to inspect every bolt, every burnt cable. Madison watched from a distance. The cockpit had been covered, the melted sensors replaced, the twisted left wing straightened. It could have looked like a mechanical funeral, but she knew better. The plane was still breathing. Shaw joined her, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand. "You should try to sleep." "I tried. It never really works after this." "After what?" "After hearing the silence come back." He nodded without replying. The wind gently lifted the tent flaps. In the distance, they could see the silhouettes of scouts heading out to survey the area. The horizon was empty, no gunfire, no enemy radio signals. For once, the desert seemed to breathe too. "You know," Shaw went on, "last night I saw Miller look up to follow your plane. I think it's the first time I've ever seen him pray." Madison smiled faintly. "He'll pray again if he stays here." "Yes, but this time he'll know who to pray to." They stood in silence for a while. Behind them, the Hog ticked softly in the rising heat. A mechanic emerged from beneath the fuselage. "Captain, the hydraulic system's almost back online. We can test it tomorrow." She simply nodded. "Good. Take your time, he's earned it." She took a few steps toward the runway, her hand resting on the still warm fuselage. The sunlight revealed patches of torn paint, the marks of fire. It was no longer just a machine, it was a witness to change, to proof. Miller came up behind her, his steps heavier than usual. He still wore his tactical vest, his features drawn, but his eyes had lost that constant edge of vigilance. "We held because of you, Raven. Transmissions came back last night. Command wants your full report by 1800. "Understood," she replied. Then she hesitated, glancing at the Hog. "After that, I think I'll fix it completely." "You planning to take off again?" "You don't mend a wing just to leave it on the ground, Captain." He gave a quiet laugh. "You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. A guy who used to say war isn't made for those who love to fight, but for those who refuse to die in silence." That's a good line. It cost him dearly. A silence followed. Then Miller raised his hand, not to salute this time, but to rest it on her shoulder. "Thank you, Raven. You owe us nothing, but we owe you everything." She answered with a simple nod. Those weren't the kind of words one commented on. They carried the weight of simple truths. When he left, she stayed there for a while, staring at the empty runway. The Hogswell tracks formed an almost straight line, fading slowly beneath the wind. She followed that line with her eyes until it disappeared into the sand. A familiar voice called from behind. "Dalton. I got a message from Central Command. They want me to help you with the technical report." "I've already started." "Of course." He stood beside her, gazing at the aircraft. "You know, I spent 20 years saying an engine doesn't have a soul. Last night, I saw yours beat for you. So maybe I was wrong. It doesn't have a soul, Dalton. We're the ones who give it one. The old man nodded. Then keep yours strong. We're still going to need it. When he walked away, Madison sat down on an empty crate facing the runway. The sun was high now, washing the base in pale gold. She closed her eyes for a moment. The sounds of the camp were returning, the rumble of a truck, the clatter of an antenna, voices. Life was resuming. In that new quiet, for the first time in a long while, she felt something unexpected, peace. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Night fell over Camp Resolute with a soothing slowness. The desert wind had stilled. Stars appeared one by one, suspended in a clear sky. The base, usually tense, vibrated with a rare calm. People spoke in low voices, walked more slowly. In the distance, the hog rested, its dark silhouette under the floodlights like an improvised monument. Madison sat on the hangar steps, her notebook on her knees. She wrote slowly, her hands still marked with grease. The words came without haste, coordinates, diagnostics, mechanical observations. But between the lines, there was something else, a story she would write for no one but herself. Footsteps warned her before he spoke. It was Miller. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, offering one to her. I figured you could use another. Thanks, she said. They sat in silence for a while, watching the empty runway. The heat of the day had faded, replaced by a gentle coolness. You know, he said at last, when I heard that hog's engine roar last night, I thought it was a mirage. We'd lost everything, no comms, no support, and then that sound. I knew we weren't alone. The hog always makes that sound, Captain. You just need someone to wake it up. He smiled faintly. Are you staying? Command wants to send me to Bagram. Evaluation, debriefing, all the usual protocols. But if the hog stays here, I'll come back. He doesn't like being left grounded too long. And you? She shrugged. I don't like forgetting why we came. Their eyes met. In Miller's gaze was a silent gratitude, stripped of all rank. You know, Raven, you've taught them something no manual ever could. For what courage does not make a sound before it roars. She nodded slowly, then closed her notebook. I just did what I knew how to do. Fly. The captain stood, adjusted his cap, and that alone was enough to change the whole camp. When he left, she remained alone for a while. The distant hum of the generators marked the rhythm of the night. The stars reflected on the hog's canopy. She stood, walked to it. The cold metal shone faintly under her fingers. She pressed her palm against the fuselage and closed her eyes. Memories flooded in, the dust of Hellman, the radio screams, the roar of the cannon, the white light of Kane's explosion. So many lost voices, but also the one that now lived because of this flight. She realized then that every mission, every flight, every second spent battling fear formed a single thread, the one connecting the living to those they had left behind. The silence around her had changed. It was no longer the void after battle, it was the peace of those who know they held their ground. A gentle breeze swept across the runway. Dust rose slowly, dancing in the light. In the distance, laughter rose, timid and awkward, the men of the camp rediscovering the taste of speaking, of living. She watched them for a moment, then lifted her eyes to the sky. The pale moon hung high between the clouds. She smiled. For you too, Kane, she whispered. We survived. She remained like that for a few seconds before turning on her heels. Her boots echoed softly on the runway. The hog stood there, imposing, silent, guardian of all they had endured. And when she disappeared into the hangar light, the camp, for the first time in a long while, slept without fear.